Okay, today we're going to talk about this 1950s Robot Bulldozer toy. Operates on 2 D cells, bump and go action. Has a like a bike horn type beeper in there, and the robot's eyes on top of his head will light as it rotates and goes to other things. This is a mint example with a very nice box with inserts, and I was going to shoot this out in the hut, but it wouldn't work, so I had to bring it in the house to fix it. So as I was repairing it, I took a bunch of pictures, and I thought we'd go over that first, for those of you that enjoy knowing what's going on inside these things. So let me kind of get you centered there. And what if I angle this a little? Does that help? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe somewhere like there. Alright, let's try that. I can raise that up a little bit too. So, you're going to start with your tractor, and the first thing you're going to do is you remove the robot. You'll notice he's got 2 contacts on the bottom, and the arms and legs come off these control posts, because as the toy is running and bumping and going, the arms and legs move, and the 2 contacts are for the light bulb that's up inside the robot's head. So you get him out of the way. Then the next thing you're going to have to do is remove this metal plate, like so. And if your only problem with the toy was the fact that the motor wasn't running or needed cleaning, then you might be able to just do it from here and not go any further. But they had more electrical problems than just that. So you get that off, and this is a picture showing the top side at that point. Next thing is to remove the whole bottom plate part. There's a couple of tabs here and a couple of tabs that slide under these axles in the back, and then it just lifts off. So again, now you can get in to see more of it, but you really haven't gotten any further than you were before as far as being able to troubleshoot. Just a side view of the same situation. So back on the inside there were all these little tabs, and let me go back one picture or two. There is a hole in this plate when it turns, and if you rotate it just right, you can get to 2 of the tabs that are hidden under this plate. So you rotate it to the hole, bend that tab, rotate it to the hole, bend that tab. Once you get the tabs straight, then you can lift the top body part off, and now you can see the bulk of the wiring. This is a commutator. We'll get into that in a minute. Here's the switch, which protrudes from the top side. There's a metal bracket and a piece of cardboard, so if you want to get in to see if your switch is working right, you have to remove that piece of metal that was there, and then I'm bending the cardboard back because it's actually crimped underneath. If you wanted to take the cardboard out, you'd have to undo those. These gross looking solder connections, these are all factory solder connections. This is factory wire too, single conductor wire, very non-forgiving. The way the switch is going to work is this contact, this wire here, is going to this little brass insert right to there, and this contact, there's a brass insert eyelet, I should be saying, but when this lever moves, they didn't want this wire bending every time because otherwise it's going to break. It's a single conductor wire. So they have this piece of metal which has a hole, and then there's another piece of metal that has a hole that runs up on the back side of this, so when this moves it can hit there. So this piece doesn't ever actually move. It doesn't crimp so tight that this is forced to move whenever you move the lever. This just kind of sits there floating. So what you've got is a situation where if oxidation occurs between this piece of metal and the one that you can't actually see in this picture that's on the other side of this lever that gets pushed over to touch that rivet, you don't get much conduction there. So I put in my anti-corrosion spray and cleaned it up as best I could, and the ohmmeter said it was working, so I moved on from that. Testing the bike horn. All bike horns from the old days usually would run off 1 C-cell battery and sometimes 2 at the very most, but their metal frame is one side, so the whole metal frame of this toy is ground, is 1 conductor for all the circuits, and then the power on the other one is going to be this pink wire. So wanting to check to see if the horn was working right, I started by simply applying negative to here and my 3 volts to the pink wire, and found that you could hear the horn diaphragm sucking in. There's just an electromagnet in there going click, click, but not honking. And these screws on the back are what adjust pressure on that little plate that's being pulled back and forth, so you can get it to where it vibrates right. You have a locking nut which you loosen, then you put a screwdriver on the screw and you turn it until it beeps real easily, and then tighten the nut back up. And that needed to be adjusted. It was not honking when I gave it 3 volts. And this metal plate that it's secured to was loose, so I actually ran a solder connection between that plate and this frame to make sure that it would get a good ground. This is just showing the bottom plates that we removed and the cover that went around the switch. And this is just showing the bottom side of the little robot guy, so you can see the 2 conductors that go up to run his light bulb in his head. There he is from the front side. So you can see how the lights inside the head, it would shine out through the eyes and also illuminate this piece of plastic. These are the connections on the inside that those 2 pins off that robot plug into. And they also use that as a place to bring other wires together. For example, this is that horn wire that we just talked about. And this would be the ground, which normally they had soldered right from there to this part of the frame. I did add a second ground wire from there to the main body of the frame here, just to make sure that the robot eye would get ground. Because when it goes to here, the only way it's going to get ground is through these tabs, which are all through painted areas, and they oxidize. So these ugly solder connections, again, this is all factory. These are brushes that are going to run on this rod. This rod is on a piece of fiber board to isolate it from this tube that's going to go down to that bump and go drive, and to isolate it from this frame. But there is a wire that goes all the way up through that tube that is soldered to the inside of this brass sleeve. And these 2 wipers on either side are just pinching it to make sure we can supply power, because this is where the power is going to go down to that motor. The motor in that bump and go drive gets ground off frame, which would be this piece here that rotates, and where it touches here is where it would get its ground. And then that wire that runs up through it to this isolated piece of brass is where we're going to put the positive 3 volts. So we have ground here, positive 3 volts there. They have a wire that's soldered between these 2, so both these get positive, and a wire that comes up to that, and that comes actually from the switch that we looked at earlier. And then this one goes up to those connections where the robot was plugging in. Okay, let's go. Here's a larger overview of the whole thing. The battery connections, you have your ground ones here, which they have a short wire, and there'll be a better picture of it later, but just from that tab right there to the closest part of the frame. And then off of here, it's one of these pink wires. I believe it's probably, actually has to go up to the switch first. So it's going to be one of the white wires that goes up to the switch. This is looking at it from the bump and go side, the bottom side. There's a fiber board where some of those wires were passing through that we talked about. This is the, right here you can see that little solder joint. That's that ground wire off that battery connector we just talked about, right to the frame. And this pink wire comes from the positive one, and it's just passing through this, to go up to the switch, because that's going to go to the switch first. These 2 wires are what causes the horn to honk and the light on the robot's head to flash. So they have a switch located here, which isn't as straightforward as it looks like. One, you would think, well, it's just it pushes a little lever, and you think, well, it just touches the metal to ground it and completes the circuit. But no, because the whole frame is already ground, they couldn't do that way, and the bike horn itself is ground, so they couldn't do it that way. They actually have to switch the 3 volts positive. So there's 2 isolated contacts that are sitting in there, and then there's a piece of fiber board and then a piece of metal. And as this bump and go thing drives, it has high points, That pushes against the metal, which pushes against the fiber, which pushes the two isolated contacts together, and that's what gives you your beeping and light flashing. There's that hole I talked about earlier to get to those two tabs. This is showing the motor, and what I was trying to get in the picture was this wire. This wire is what comes from that brass isolated part that rotates. This is that big plate that rotates. The wire is right like in the middle of this motor going straight up to those two contacts to make a commutator. So one side of the motor has a wire on the back side that you can't see. It just goes right from the motor's brush and solders right to the motor itself, and then that positive one from those brushes comes and solders right on there. Pulled back so you can get a little bit further away view. See what I'm saying? Here's that big plate that rotates. Here's that little wire we talked about, and right underneath there's that post that runs up, and that wire runs up into that post to go to that commutator so it can go power no matter how much this turns. Like I talked about earlier, the whole frame, everything that touches the frame is ground. And I guess that is about the end of the build pictures. You kind of go backwards to get things going again. But obviously I had brush contact problems in the motor that I needed to clean. I had contact problems for the beeper and the horn. I had contact problems on these wipers at that point. Had to adjust the horn so that it would even beep, because otherwise it draws so much current that the motor can't run. And what else? I think that was about the bulk of it. Just comes down to metal that oxidizes and causes a lot of contact problems. So I had the contact problems in the switch, which again I just sprayed with the antioxidant. So, comes down to the toy itself. The two D-cell batteries. Let's see if we can adjust this camera a little better. The two D-cell batteries sit in here. Then this lid just clamps down like that. Then over on this side is that switch we talked about. See, it's covered by that little metal thing. When you turn it on, the bump and go drive wheels are turning. And if it bumps into something, let me get a little further away from the camera so we can get everything in frame. I'm rotating the bump and go drive on the bottom. You can see the arms and levers move. And I'm going to loosen the camera on, so hold on here. Hold on. Okay. The camera's on a tripod, so it's kind of hard to convince it to let me move it the way I want it to go. Alright, let's close the battery cover. I'm going to turn the switch on here. And it just depends how much the bump and go drive turns, whether it's going to beep or not when it hits something. And in the case of me trying to hold the camera and keep my feet out of the way, that isn't going to happen real easily. But you saw how it works. You've seen the insides. Pretty cool vintage toy. I was glad that I was able to get it working again without doing any damage to it, so it's still mint and now working.